Well, Todd was conceived when we were in Hawaii on R&R while he was in Vietnam. He was allowed 1 week off, so to speak. And so we met in Hawaii. And as luck would have it, that's when Todd was conceived. And then he was born October 11th, 1969 at Hinesville, Georgia. That's where he was stationed when we got back. Had an Army doctor who told me after I gave birth that I looked like I was still 5 months pregnant. I just never have liked that man. But we didn't have to pay much, except my mother came and she had to pay
$10.
$10. I was thinking it was $7.95.
Whatever it was.
It was a little dab of money that he didn't have on him to pay the bill before we could leave. And I think the bill was for the meals he ate so Mom chipped in and paid for that so we could get out of the hospital. It was different. I remember when Mom was still there when we gave Todd his first bath and took his clothes off, and he flung his arms and legs out and screamed bloody murder. So then I learned to keep a top on him or something to wash him up for the first few weeks. And then he was constipated, so we called and they said I think it was a teaspoon in his, or it might have been a tablespoon in his formula, which they meant the whole batch because you made your own formula, so you made a whole batch at once. And we thought it was in each bottle. And he then no longer was constipated. He had the runs for a long time. His family came at Christmas time. I think he was a pretty good baby. I don't remember being too stressed about. He was a lot of fun. Took a lot of pictures. And by that time, we were back on the farm. Started farming, and we were living in the Gorgon place, which was an old farmhouse, and Rex farmed to ground. Had propane stove. It was a nice big house. It was just an old farmhouse. Tara was born on January 5th, 1972. And it was very quick labor. I remember waking up. It was about 1 a.m, I think. Woke you up. And it was cold, and it was icy and snowy, and the roads weren't good. But on the way, I said, you better move it along. And then she was born within an hour after we got to the hospital.
She was the only one of the kids that I saw born. Light wasn't very good in that room. I thought she was a boy at first.
Yeah, she was a girl. We had boys' names picked out, not a girl's name. So while we were trying to decide on a name, he kept bringing up all his old girlfriends' names, and said, I don't think that's going to happen.
Kayla was a nice sounding name.
Yeah. She was another good baby. All my babies were good babies. I was pretty fortunate. At about 5 or 6 weeks, she started vomiting profusely. A lot. So we took her to the doctor, and Dr. Matthews thought she had bronchitis. Gave me some medicine, which didn't help. And it got to the point where I could sit on the sofa to feed her and spread blankets clear through to the end of the sofa, and they call it projectile vomiting, and she would vomit clear to the end of the sofa. And I thought, this is not normal. Anyway, one morning when I woke up, she was dry. She was becoming dehydrated. So then I called the doctor, and he said, you better get her right in. So we took her to St. Paul to Dr. Matthews, and he took one look at her and said, you need to get her to Grand Island. So that ride to Grand Island was kind of a scary one. And then when we got her there, they had to run some tests, and I could hear her crying, but couldn't, do anything about it. And then they said they were going to do surgery, and what they diagnosed it at was
Pyloric stenosis.
Yeah, pyloric stenosis, which probably was a minor surgery. There was something in her esophagus that was getting blocked into her stomach.
There's a muscle around the entrance to the stomach, and the muscle got too big and it blocked the entrance into the stomach.
But then when they were doing the surgery, they nicked her esophagus, and so then she had to spend more time in the hospital. And she was, her head was shaved where they put the IV in, and she was kind of strapped down and had little mittens on, and it was very heartbreaking. So then the day that I thought I was going to get to hold her, another baby had come in with surgery, and it was in the same room, and they wouldn't let me in. So then I cried. It all turned out well. I would guess about a week. Seemed like a long time. Matthew was born, our youngest, on November 28th, 1976. I always want to say 78, and I know that's not right.
Here we got the pivot.
1976. And Matthew was also born in the St. Paul Hospital. And at that time, Marge, his stepmother, was working at the hospital as a nurse. She about made me a nervous wreck because you were a little bit jaundiced, and she was giving me all the bad things about that. So I didn't appreciate that.
When Tara was born, like I say, I was in on the delivery, and they said, well, why don't you see if you can get that oxygen bottle open, because we can't get it open. I couldn't get it open either. He said, well, I hope we don't need it. And then the prenatal heartbeat monitor, it didn't work. Well, they're probably going to be all right. So then I had every intention of watching Matthew being born, but they slammed the door in my face, so I just figured that was enough of that, so I didn't see him born.
With Matthew, my water broke about 10 o'clock at night, I think it was. And then we went to the hospital, and it was several hours before he was born. That was a fairly easy time. He was a good baby, always in a good mood. Loved by his older sister and brother.
It was very difficult, because the farm that we had rented, which I was so happy that we had gotten rented, wasn't a good farm. And then Dad was an alcoholic at the time, and he drank all the time. And it was just a real stressful time. First year that we farmed, we had a drought and didn't raise anything. I went back to the banker that next year, and he said, well, where are you going to get the money to farm my second year? And I said, well, I'm going to borrow it from you. And he did loan it to me. Between the situation with Dad and Mom, they weren't getting along hardly at all. And of course they later divorced, but it was very stressful. But I never did waver as far as that being what I wanted to do, and I just continued to march.
I remember when we got back to the farm, he started talking about the debt and what would happen if this and what would happen if that, and I said, I don't want to know that. I don't want to know anything about that. So then that went by for a couple years, and then I finally said, I got to know something. What is going on? Because you basically had a 1-year salary that you were supposed to kind of budget and live off of. So I needed to know when my chickens didn't hatch out very well, then I needed to know what our income was going to be.
I bought your mother some chickens, and that was a disaster.
It was my job to clean the eggs, gather the eggs and clean the eggs, and oh Lord, I hated that. I hated that so bad. I can still smell those eggs and that dirty chicken water.
And if the hen gave her some trouble, she'd just leave the eggs under, so most of the eggs got left under the hen.
I kept a little book of how we were doing, little budget book. We weren't making much money, so that didn't last too long.
Guy came along, gave us a few bucks and a beer, and the chickens were gone.
When you kids were little, we went on a few trips. We made a lot of trips to Kansas City, but we also went to South Dakota. We went to Colorado one year.
Wyoming, I'm not sure the kids went. I was on the board of directors of the Grand Island Production Credit Association, and every year we went to the annual meeting. And a couple times we took the kids along. Went down to see the Royals.
The worlds of fun, and we had puppies. Seemed like we had dogs around. Once you kids got old enough to be involved in school activities, then we spent a lot of time. Tried to go to everything and be supportive, and I guess we, maybe had fun with just ourselves. For me, when you kids were little, what I enjoyed the most was watching you excel or become proficient, or always grow in the things you were interested in, whether it was sports or music or plays or whatever. I was just always proud of the accomplishments that all of you made, and how well you got along with people, how well you did in school. I always felt like raising kids wasn't too bad of a deal, except that little spell in between there. But
that little spell in between there was Todd.
No, I didn't want to say that. Till we kind of got that figured out, it was a little tough. But maybe it was because my parenting skills weren't the best. Didn't know a lot about what to do to help kids that were really active, and you just kind of did what you thought, and when spanking and yelling didn't work, then you tried something else, and kind of finally got it figured out. He turned out pretty good.
Yeah, he did.
So I guess we didn't do too bad.
Well, that was the 1980s. Things were terrible then because interest rates were so high, and we were borrowing a lot of money, and I think it was probably around 1983, 84. I was still on the board of directors at the Grand Island Production Credit Association. I remember I went in there one morning, had to be there at 7:30, and just about all the loan officers and everything were there. And basically they were going to decide that morning whether I was going to continue farming. And it had gotten to that point, and it was pretty bleak. So I laid out a plan on what I intended to do about it, and part of it was Mom said she would go back to school and get her teacher's degree, and then I would sign a 10-year note to pay back a big chunk of money, but I'd take 10 years to do it, and they were kind enough to accept that plan and kept me in business, but it came awfully close to them shutting us down that time. Scary time.
A lot of farmers quit, had to give it up at that time, so it was hard on the neighborhood. In the 80s, so you wouldn't have been too old yet. Probably just didn't have as much as some of the other people, but although, there's a good chance that any of you kids would have hung out with were from a farm family, and it was just kind of a tough time for that career in this area.